We're going to talk about the election of 1804. The Federalist Party is going to have a little bit of difficulty in this because the Federalist Party is kind of on the way out. So the presidential election of 1804 is going to pit the incumbent President Jefferson. What you mean by incumbent is they're the ones already holding the office. Is going to pit the incumbent President Jefferson against Federalist candidate Charles Pinckney. That's a familiar name we've talked about. So in the presidential election of 1804, incumbent President Thomas Jefferson will run against Federalist Charles Pinckney. Now, who was the vice president? This is really key that you remember this. Who was the vice president for the Republicans? Aaron Burr. Well, Jefferson is going to change his vice presidential candidates, and he's going to go with George Clinton. He's going to go with George Clinton. And the man that's going to run with Charles Pinckney for the Federalists will be Rufus King. So when you look at this election for the Republican Party, Jefferson will seek re-election. However, he will run with George Clinton as his vice presidential running mate. The Federalists will counter with Charles Pinckney for president and Rufus King for vice president. Anybody know why Aaron Burr was dropped off the ticket by Jefferson to run in 1804?
Was it because they thought that he was
No, we haven't. We're ways off from that. He decided to run for the governorship of New York. So he wanted out of the vice presidency and he wanted to run for governor of New York. So because he was running for governor of New York, that being Aaron Burr, Jefferson changed vice presidential candidates and went with George Clinton. Well, this election wasn't even close. The electoral vote was 162 for Jefferson and Clinton and 14 for Pinckney and King. It was a old-fashioned rump kicking. Yeah, it was awful. Yep, it was awful. 162 electoral votes for Jefferson and Clinton, 14 for Pinckney and King. Because remember, now they're voting on the same parties, so we don't have that confusion. The only two states that Pinckney and King won were Delaware and Connecticut. They were the only two states they won, Delaware and Connecticut. Jefferson Clinton carried all the rest. At that point, it was the largest margin of victory in American history to that point. It was the largest victory in American history up to that point. So Thomas Jefferson will serve a second term and George Clinton will serve as his vice presidential candidate. Now that's going to take us up to Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr and lead to a duel in which one of them is going to lose their life. Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. Now, as I mentioned to you before, Aaron Burr decided to campaign for governor of New York rather than run for the vice presidency in 1804. Now, Alexander Hamilton, remember him, very influential Federalist, right? Disliked and distrusted Aaron Burr. And so he encouraged the Federalist Party and anybody he knew in the Republican Party that would listen to him to vote against Aaron Burr for governor of New York. So Alexander Hamilton, who disliked and distrusted Burr, basically went out and campaigned against him to anyone that would listen. And as a result, I don't know if it was true or not, but Burr eventually lost the election and blamed Hamilton for his defeat. Who knows whether that was true or not, could have been, who knows who we all talked to. But the point being is Burr loses his bid to become governor of New York, and he blames Alexander Hamilton for his loss. Now, Alexander Hamilton had made an uncomplimentary remark about Burr during the election campaign. Probably more than one, but Burr knew of at least one, and he demanded that Hamilton apologize to him for that. So Aaron Burr gets the word that Alexander Hamilton had made an uncomplimentary remark about him during his campaign for the governorship, and when he finds that out, Aaron Burr demands that Alexander Hamilton apologize to him. Hamilton refuses. So in those days, to settle arguments, Aaron Burr challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel. So Burr demanded an apology from Hamilton for an uncomplimentary remark that Hamilton had made about him during his election campaign for governor. When Hamilton refused to apologize to Burr, Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel. And Hamilton accepted his challenge. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about a duel because I'm going to be whipping some Ryland rear here.
You're gonna take it out?
Next week. I'm going to take me another W. Now this is how a duel works. Okay, the combatants are given their choice of weapons. Normally they were dueling pistols. Okay, one-shot dueling pistols. They were nice cases and all lined out. The combatants would go back to back and agree to a number of paces, normally 10. And they would walk those 10 paces and they would turn and fire at will. And there was like a moderator there, which Brian's going to serve as in this particular duel we're going to have, that makes sure all the rules are followed, okay? In other words, he'll set the guys up back to back, they'll agree on the number of paces, they'll turn and shoot. Now there's no rule on shooting. And so you can either turn and shoot fast at the same time, or you can turn and let the other guy shoot and you wait to hope he doesn't hit you. But the rule is you have to stand fast. So if you do your 10 paces and you turn around and you shoot and the other guy doesn't, even if you hit him and don't kill him, you have to stand fast while he takes proper aim and shoots. That's the rule. You can't run, or it's not that type of thing. And we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson in a duel one time down the line, in which he chooses to fire second because this guy is supposedly the best shot, hoping to survive, and the guy actually hits Jackson, and Jackson presses his hand against his wound. The other guy has to stand fast according to rules. Jackson takes careful aim and shoots and kills him, and Jackson survives the duel. That's how they work. Okay, so with that in mind, Hamilton accepts the challenge and they meet early in the morning on July 11th, 1804. They meet early in the morning on July 11th of 1804. July 11th, 1804. And as I mentioned, both men were placed back to back. They were given a certain number of paces that they had agreed upon before they turned toward each other and fired their pistols. Well, at the signal to fire, Burr raised his pistol, took aim, and fired. Hamilton made no attempt to fire. He was hit, fell mortally wounded, and died shortly afterwards. So, at the signal to fire, Aaron Burr raised his pistol, took aim, and fired. Hamilton, who made no attempt to fire at Burr, fell mortally wounded and died shortly afterwards. Now, why didn't Hamilton shoot, Rachel? What was his story? You know that?
I don't remember exactly why. I just know, I think their duel took place where Hamilton's son also died in the duel.
That is why you're in this class, dear. That's true. Hamilton had lost his son to a duel several years back in the exact spot where his duel commenced, and Hamilton after that had pledged that he would never raise a pistol in anger. Okay? Where did you learn that?
So why would he accept?
What?
So why he accepts the duel?
That's a good question. We're going to get to that. That's a great leading question. So, Hamilton had lost his son to a duel several years back, in the exact same spot where this duel commenced, and he had pledged from that point on that he would never raise a pistol in anger. Now, in answering Meg's question of why would he accept the duel if he wasn't going to fire, he chose pride and commitment to his values over his own life. Because do you not accept a challenge in a duel? Absolutely not. If somebody challenges you to a duel, you don't say no. Not in those days. You know what I mean? That's how you proved your manhood or settled arguments. So he accepted that duel even though he knew he wasn't going to fire. So he chose pride and commitment to his values over his own life. Now, Emily, late in 1806, Aaron Burr was involved in some vague schemes against the government. Later in 1806, Aaron Burr was involved in some vague schemes against the government. And because of that, he was arrested and charged with treason. Now, when you're arrested and charged, does that mean you're guilty? No, you go to trial and figure it out, okay? So late in 1806, Aaron Burr was involved in some vague schemes against the government. Because of this, he was arrested and charged with treason. Well, his fate would be decided by Chief Justice John Marshall. He would be the man that would decide the fate of Aaron Burr. He would look at the evidence and see if he did do something treasonous against the government. Well, when John Marshall went through all the evidence, he acquitted Aaron Burr. In other words, he found him not guilty of treason. But you think about that. How's your life going to be in America once you went on trial for treason? Bad. So what he did is he moved to Europe. He moved to Europe. So the Supreme Court Justice John Marshall acquitted Burr, who then chose to move to Europe. He stayed in Europe for a period of time to kind of let wounds heal, so to speak, and he later returned to New York, but eventually died under the shadow of disapproval. In other words, he had no friends, no allies. People saw him as bad. Okay? So he moves to Europe after he was acquitted. He eventually moves back to New York and dies under the shadow of disapproval. So, Paco, you going to be here tomorrow?
Yes.
Hey, who's going to be here tomorrow? You might have that duel tomorrow. We'll see.
Somebody's got to report. I want to see.
Oh, we always do. I have them from the last few years, yeah. All right. That'll move us to a new subtopic, which is the war in Europe. Is there a war in Europe? Who's fighting the war in Europe right now? Napoleon, yeah. So we'll talk about the war in Europe. And every time there's a war, who gets themselves kind of in it? We do. We'll see how that happens this time. So the war in Europe. As we mentioned in earlier lectures, Napoleon had begun his conquest of Europe. And who is he fighting against mainly? Great Britain. So the war in Europe, which is really just involving in a lot of ways Great Britain and France, and it's going to create some serious problems for the United States. Okay? So as we mentioned in earlier lectures, Napoleon began his conquest of Europe, and this war in Europe, which was basically between Great Britain and France, created some very serious problems for the United States. Now, by 1807, Napoleon had conquered almost all of Europe except for Russia and Great Britain. Those were the only two countries that Napoleon had not conquered by 1807. He had conquered almost all of Europe, the only exception being Russia and Great Britain. Now, when you compared France and Napoleon to Great Britain, the French were stronger on land. In other words, their what was stronger? Army. However, Great Britain still maintained the strongest navy in the world. So if you look at this matchup, the French had a much stronger army, but the British had a much stronger navy. Now, the United States is sitting back thinking, hey, this conflict between Great Britain and France could be a great opportunity for us because what could we do? What? No? No? Make some money. How?
So,
Absolutely, we can trade with both countries and make some big time money. So the United States plan to make good profit on trade with the two countries. Well, who's got the stronger navy? The British. So they control the seas, right? So what do you think they're going to do when these American ships start taking supplies to France? We might not so much take them out, but they're certainly going to start to seize those ships. And not only are they going to seize the ships, we talked about this before, they're going to impress American sailors. And I don't mean impress them like, hey, you're awesome. They're going to kidnap them and make them serve in the Royal Navy. So as these American ships travel to France with these goods that we want to make good profits on, the British Navy starts to seize American ships and impress American sailors. This obviously is going to cause a lot of friction between the United States and Great Britain because we do not want them to do that, right? Now, the British even went farther than that. They even went farther than seizing our ships and impressing our sailors. In 1807, Great Britain passed a series of laws known as the Orders in Council. The Orders in Council, which is on your ID sheet. So not only they start to seize our ships and impress our sailors, they passed this series of law in 1807 known as the Orders in Council. And basically what the Orders in Council stated is that it forbid any American ship from entering any foreign port under the control of France.
how can
What?
that?
Well,
What?
yeah, listen. So these Orders in Council were laws passed by the British that forbid any American ship from entering any foreign port under the control of France. What do you think France did as soon as they heard about the Orders in Council? They passed their own Orders in Council forbidding any American ship to enter any port under the control of Britain. So both countries have told us, as us being the United States, you cannot trade with each other, with the warring countries. Well, this was violating the long-standing principle of foreign relations among all countries of the world, known as freedom of the seas. We've always had a long-standing principle between countries of the world that the nobody owns the seas. It's just like if you go fishing, Peyton, on private land. And let's say that we're starting right here and this is BLM land, but right over there, that creek that runs this way is on private property. If this creek runs into that creek, as long as you stay in the river, you can fish all the way down. They do not own the river. Freedom, right away, freedom of fishing, right? Same thing here, freedom of the seas. Nobody owns the seas. So for both those countries to tell us that we could not enter, that was a violation of freedom of the seas. Now, Jefferson, because of one thing he did with Congress, what did he talk Congress into doing? We talked about yesterday, it was going to come back and bite him. What? Right. He reduced the size of our Army and Navy, so we're not very tough right now. We're pretty defensive. So the last thing Jefferson wants is a war with either Great Britain or France. But he's in a pickle here because these guys are seizing our ships. They are impressing our sailors, and they're passing laws saying we can't trade with either country. They are violating the principle of freedom of the seas. Well, he did the smart thing here. Rather than bow up his neck and get his fists out, he basically took all American ships off the high seas, waiting for this conflict between France and Britain to cool down or even end. So he wasn't foolish. He wasn't brass. He said, you know, this is a no-win situation. We're going to take our ships off the high seas. and wait until cooler heads prevail, and maybe this conflict will get settled and we'll go back to business. But it's not worth the risk right now of going to war. Which will take us to our last subtopic of this test material, the Embargo Act of 1807. Now, Jefferson believed that he could not afford war with either country. He wanted to end any conflict with Great Britain and France. But not everybody always gets the word, right? Some son of a gun always doesn't get the word. So, we're going to have to make sure that these American ships stay off the high seas. So what Jefferson did to make sure everybody in America was clear with that is he urged Congress to pass a new law called an embargo. Okay? He asked him to pass a new law which is called an embargo. And what an embargo does, if you embargo, they even embargo your ACT scores. I'll get a big list of your ACT scores, but after you take it as a junior, this is embargoed, which means that only I can look at it. I can't spread it out until they get all this information out nationally. They don't want me telling how well Warland kids did before ACT puts that out. So they're embargoed. They come with a big red cover sheet, embargoed. You're not supposed to let it out. Well, an embargo would mean that basically American ships could not trade with any foreign country, including Great Britain and France. So this embargo that Jefferson asked Congress to pass would forbid American ships from trading with any foreign countries, including Great Britain and France. Now, Sully, why would they do that? Why would they make it every country? Why would they just make it France and Britain, dear?